Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Please forgive me my tardiness. I have been engaged in a number of matters at the seminary. Someone incorrectly set the type in the printing office. Again. One of the boys snapped his graver clean in two. Again. And the fellow entrusted with the care of our kitchens is apparently sick in bed. Again. But no matter. I have nothing better to do with my time than to attend to the duties of cook, servant, and bottle washer for 60 stomachs. I have 2 hands and 1 mouth, all of which I cheerfully devote to the service of my scholars, and yet sermons must be preached whether they are prepared or not. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Lorrin Andrews. My purpose is to ensure the function and advancement of the Lahainaluna Seminary, which some have affectionately referred to as the University of Hawaii. For several years now, I have been struggling with the question, what is the best method for conducting native schools? Or, more accurately, what is the best method for conducting native schools when the lack of properly appointed schoolhouses and qualified teachers, the utter destitution of school books and various other supplies, and the constant and diversified demand for missionary labor in other departments are all taken into account? I am displeased with the mission for not having more sense to start such an unwieldy institution without the means to carry it on. I'm displeased with my students for their never-ending awkwardness. And I am displeased with myself for my lack of skill in managing such a school. But I put my best foot forward and trudge on. With me it is ho'o mana vanui, maoli no, as the natives would say. Remain patient. Persevere. Now, in this matter I have perhaps felt more than most of my brethren, and in many regards have been more troublesome. I can offer no greater apology than by giving an account of myself prior to becoming a missionary. I was born in East Windsor, Connecticut, on the 29th of April, 1795. My family was one of distinction, if not wealth. When I was still a youth, my father elected to emigrate to the Western Territories, and as such, while other boys were in school, I was felling the first trees of Ohio, chasing the wild beasts, and holding intercourse with the Indians. My preparation for college was scant, and most of what I pretended to know I was obliged to learn once I got there. My courses at Jefferson College in Pennsylvania consisted of 3 summers' tuition and 1 winter's, after which I was forced to take my leave for want of funds. I had studied just enough to acquire a real taste for literature, and I greatly lamented the early termination of my education. I spent several years in teaching school and working as a mechanic and a printer until I had saved up enough money to enter the theological seminary at Princeton. My religious education was obtained as a peripatetic. In getting it, I was forced to travel from Kentucky and Ohio to New England 6 times, 3 times on foot. My rule was to keep my eyes and ears open and my mouth shut as much as possible. And yet, I was ashamed of my writing style and my manner of speaking. But the only way was to press forward, try to make up for my deficiencies through hard study. Despite my doubts, the presbytery seemed satisfied with me and presented me with my license to preach. Upon the orders of the American Board, I was to proceed to the Sandwich Islands in 1827. There my task, in addition to spreading the gospel, would be to translate the Old Testament from the Hebrew to the native Hawaiian language. Had I known what a paltry library I was to have, even 24 hours before our departure, I should absolutely have refused to set foot on board that ship. To arrive with such meager supplies and with such an appointment of work, well, this pained me greatly. But such was the will of the board, and through them the will of the Lord. And when the first company of missionaries sailed into port in 1820, They discovered a people and a nation literally without a god and without a faith, for the ancient religious customs and ceremonies were no more. The pulse of the nation was feeble and fluttering, ominous of an awful pause. And yet, Providence had smiled upon these people by delivering into their hands the great gift of learning. The first schools in the islands opened in 1822, and the first scholars were the chiefs. The desire of the people for books and the ability to read and understand them began to grow. This was cause for celebration, or it should have been, had the mission the adequate supplies to meet the growing demand. The only school book was the Piapa, a slim 8-page tract which related to the principles of the native language. Furthermore, for a nation to be supplied with teachers solely from a foreign country, this is unheard of in the history of the world. Foreigners may carry the gospel and plant it, but if foreigners must also water and nurse it, the fruit will not be worthy of the culture. Therefore, 1 or 2 Hawaiians, clad in the panoply of the gospel, will be worth a half dozen of us. There is a principle in nature that the stream cannot rise higher than the fountain, not in and of itself. The Piapa, in most cases, was all that the natives could teach, for it was all that they knew. Their sole method of instruction consisted of repeating alphabet sounds until it was lodged in the memory, and at this they proved themselves extremely adept. Like most natives, they were accustomed from time immemorial to learning their legends and their odes, to hearing them repeated orally. And yet, the opinion was almost universally prevalent among them that the whole of instruction, including the sole benefit to be derived from it, consisted simply in being able to say out loud words from a book without any regard to meaning. Such a matter committed, even if it is retained, is of very little profit unless the rest of the faculties of the mind are engaged. Such was the situation I found myself faced with. And in 1831, I was handed an impossible task. It was decided by a general meeting of the mission to open a high school for the better dissemination of sound knowledge throughout the islands and for the training up of more efficient instructors. Lahaina on the island of Maui was chosen as the site for this school, and my brethren entrusted me with the care of it. After a lengthy search, a suitable site was finally chosen, which the scholars later named Lahainaluna, or Upper Lahaina. Instruction began on the 5th of September, 1831. Some 25 students, ages 15 to 35, were all that could be assembled from the surrounding islands. And their qualifications were scant indeed. Not a one of them could be called a good reader. This despite the fact that most of them had been teaching school themselves for several years. The accommodations for communication and receiving instruction were slim, which is to say, none. The site of the future school at this point was still in a rude and barren shape, and the only schoolhouse was a rough shed that had been constructed from poles and long grasses by the scholars themselves. Dry grass was spread across the ground for our floor, and there the students sat, half naked in the boiling sun, as they received the wondrous principles of commas and semicolons and interrogation points, and conned over chapters of the New Testament, which was our only reading book. Here was the highest school in the Hawaiian Islands? Here were our future doctors and lawyers and school teachers and preachers. Oh, how much labor and toil and faith must be called into exercise to complete this transformation. Ha'o! Remain patient. Persevere. And yet patience is so hard to maintain. The habits of their customs of the natives were queer, and it became apparent to me that all was to be considered individually. To explain, during a recitation, sometimes I would have cause to expound upon or illustrate a particular principle for one student. This may be completely satisfactory for this student, but the exact same principle might be rejected by the next scholar. Well, I said, well, "Did you not hear what I just said?" He would reply, "Yes, but you did not teach me. What you said belonged to him." How is one to instruct a class of 60 or 70 pupils in this manner? And even if such barriers are overcome, one must ask oneself, what good is literacy if there is nothing to read? I cannot begin to describe the rare occasions on which my colleagues and I would receive new books from Boston each year. Imagine, if you will, a group of hungry dogs, half-starved, gathered together in a group, and suddenly someone throws into their midst a half a dozen bones. What a riot! We are ravenous for knowledge of the outside world. Might not the natives feel similarly? Their curiosities have been awakened and aroused. We must feed them at least enough so that they do not lose their appetite. And yet, even a dunce knows that a body cannot remain healthy on a diet of bread alone. Yes, the main staple of our meal must be theological study, but the mind, just like the body, requires life-giving vitamins, moral, political, scientific knowledge to help digest what has been devoured. Have we really done what is best for this nation by preaching to them so much and teaching them so little? Are not enlightened Christians the best Christians? If it is truly our aim to provide a broad and deep foundation for the future of these islands, we must be persuaded that literature and religion go hand in hand. Learning expands the mind. Religion purifies the heart. In order to obtain the reading materials to satisfy this aim, I acquired the old Ramage printing press from my brethren in Honolulu. From this press have sprung thousands of pages and publications, most noteworthy of which is the first newspaper in the Sandwich Islands in the native tongue. We called it Lama Hawai'i, or the Hawaiian Luminary. And the purpose of this newspaper was threefold. Firstly, to give the high school some concept of a newspaper, that ideas and facts on various subjects can be circulated in the form of a periodical. Secondly, to allow certain ideas to be communicated that might not be suitable for a sermon. And thirdly, so that the wisest of our scholars might be able to communicate their opinions freely on any subject of their choosing. The entire last page of the paper was devoted to this, and many of our brightest students, including Davida Malo and Samuel Kamakau, took to this with great avidity. And yet there are some students to whom words do not come as easily as their classmates, and they are better pleased and more easily instructed with ocular illustration. And to this end, we spent many hours creating maps so that our scholars might better their knowledge of secular and holy geography. After many months of backbreaking work drawing maps, I finally elected to engrave them instead. The only problem was, I had no idea how to go about creating an engraving. All of the articles in the encyclopedias began on this subject in the exact same way. Take a piece of copper, well polished. But how was one to polish it? Through my inquiries, it was discovered that there was not a single book in the entirety of the mission that devoted any amount of time to this subject. I had to feel my way forward in the dark. This while several of my brethren were laughing at me under their breath for the strange notions I had gotten into my head. Now, the first endeavor of any real importance was a bill of copy slips, and then a map of the Hawaiian Islands. Eventually, an entire atlas was created, for many of the natives found great skill in this type of work. Now, this endeavor was a great success for the school, but one look at my family's empty coffers reminded me that it had come at my own expense. I had thought that I would be repaid some of the money, but my superiors on the board made it perfectly clear that this idea would not be entertained. Any recompense for engraving would be over and above what your brethren have received. Therefore, your support would be disproportionate to theirs. I had taken great debt upon myself, and to the detriment of my own and my family's comfort and enjoyment, all for the betterment of my students. And here, the board was refusing to compensate me for my expenditures out of some sense of fairness to a foolish, common stock system. Well, perhaps when the time is right, I should take my skills elsewhere. For the time being, however, there is the education of the natives to be considered. It is cheerfully agreed that much knowledge has been gained by the people, and that curiosity is aroused and awareness has been awoken. But how have so many millions of pages of books been printed, circulated? How have so many hundreds of teachers been employed, and so many tens of thousands of students instructed? What is the best method for conducting native schools? Well, I suppose it is o manavanui, plain and simple. Patience and perseverance. If you'll excuse me, I must return to the seminary. No telling what kind of mischief my scholars may have gotten up to in my absence. May the word of Christ soon be preached in all the dark corners of the world. Good night.